Welcome back to Pre-Algebra Chapter 8, Section 7. In this book, we've been learning that you can graph lines. We learned about their slope and their y-intercept, and now we're going to learn just a little bit, un poco, about function notation, which we're not going to learn the whole thing because your book goes too far. I'll show you just the bit I want you to know. Now, we've learned that is something you can graph and it's a line. So one way to write it is y equals 3x plus 2. We know all about that. Weirdly, instead of writing y, you can write 0. And I will teach you much more about y when you get to Algebra 1 or Algebra 2. But weirdly, y0 or this thing, which is called function notation, and it is written it's read f of x. These are all the same thing. You can only, remember how we learned, is it a function or is it not a function? You can only use the f of x instead of y or 0 if it's a function. So it's special, it passes the pencil test, and instead of writing y, you can write f of x. And weirdly 0, so weirdly y0 and f of x are the same thing. Now, sometimes it's not just f of x. And if you've got a TI-84 graphing calculator and you've pushed that button that says y equals, you'll see that there's a list. It's y1, y2, y3, and it's so that you can graph more than one thing at a time. And I showed you that I graphed 2 lines and they were perpendicular, so you can see I've got writing on 2 lines. So if you're using function notation instead of y, if it was y, it'd be y sub 1, y sub 2, y sub 3. If you're doing function notation instead, the first equation will be f of x, the next one will be g of x, the third one will be h of x. And you know, in all my years of doing math, all the way through college, because I was that kind of major, I don't know that I ever got past h of x. Those are the 3 they like to use, okay? So here's an example of the kind of problem that I do want you to be able to do. They'll give you an equation, instead of saying y, they'll say f of x equals negative 3x plus 8, or it could be 3x plus 2, or any equation. And then sometimes they give it to you like this, and they'll say x equals 5. What you do is you take the 5 and you write it where the x was. And what you're going to do with it is you're going to substitute in 5 for the x and see what it equals. So of course we will sing substitute first. Now, sometimes they won't give you any of that. They'll just give you this, and it means if you see f and then something in parentheses, you put whatever was in that parentheses in for x. But sometimes they give you the equation and you have to write it here and write it where the x is. So that's what I did. I substituted it. Now I do negative 3 times 5 is negative 15. Bring down what I didn't mess with, plus 8. My answer is negative 7. Now your book goes on to tell you a lot more about graphing from it and stuff like that. I don't want you to know any of that. We have to save something for Algebra 1 and Algebra 2. We can't learn it all in Pre-Algebra. But if you learn this, that's pretty advanced. This is really not considered part of Pre-Algebra, learning that y0 and f of x is the same thing. And that you substitute, and what you do with it is you write what x equals and then substitute it in. This is actually a college problem. You'll do a lot of stuff with this function notation and substituting, and you'll even substitute equations in for x when you get to college. So don't let that scare you. You'll be ready for it when the time comes. But this is all I want you to know about this section. So come back and we will talk about 8-8. Math is great. That rhymes. 8-8. Math is great.